The catalog was 47 pages long, and Duran Cole had read every single one of them the night before, sitting on the floor of his rented docking bay with a cold protein wrap and a headache. He had done this not because he was hopeful, but because he was broke, and broke men study their options carefully. He had 13 credits. That was it. That was the total sum of everything he owned that was liquid. His ship, a small cargo hauler named the Drift Queen, had blown her secondary fuel converter 2 weeks ago on a run that paid nothing because the client had disappeared before delivery. The repair cost wiped him out. He had sold the cargo at a loss. He had borrowed a bunk from Russa for 3 nights and eaten her food without being asked twice. So he came to the auction at Station Drug, Suvan not as a buyer, but as a man looking for a miracle in the fine print. Station Drug Suvan was not a place anyone went on purpose. It orbited a dead gas giant at the edge of the outer rim, a grub lump of corridors and docking arms that existed mainly because some long-dead bureaucrat had decided it was a useful midpoint on a trade route that nobody used anymore. The auction hall smelled like recycled air and old machinery. The seats were bolted plastic. The auctioneer was a thin Thuvalan with 2 of his 4 arms tucked behind his back, and the bored expression of someone who had seen too many auctions go nowhere. Russa was there because she always showed up where Duran was likely to do something she would regret. She sat beside him with her arms folded, reading the same catalog on her data pad, and occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. Items 1 through 1203 sold without drama: spare engine coils, a load of salvaged plating, 2 broken navigation arrays, a crate of outdated medical supplies still in sealed packaging. Duran watched it all go past and did the math over and over in his head. 13 credits bought nothing in this room, not one scrap of anything he could actually use. Then the auctioneer reached item 1204. He almost skipped it. Duran saw the man glance down at the entry, blink once, and start to move on before catching himself. He cleared his throat and read it out in the flat voice of someone repeating words without understanding them. Item 1204, pre-registry era vessel, hull class unclassified, condition listed as unrecoverable scrap, coordinates provided in sale packet, reserve price 13 credits, any interest. Silence. The auctioneer looked around the room with the expression of a man who already knew the answer. Duran raised his hand. He was not sure why. Later, when Russa asked him that exact question with the specific kind of patience she used when she was actually furious, he would not have a good answer. He raised his hand because 13 credits was exactly the reserve price. He raised it because the words pre-registry era were sitting in his brain and doing something strange. He raised it because he had nothing to lose, which is the most dangerous state a human being can be in. Russa turned and looked at him. Nobody else bid. The auctioneer stamped the deed with the visible confusion of a man processing an unexpected outcome. He pushed the document across the counter, took Duran's 13 credits without a word, and then looked up. "Good luck with that," he said. "It is, as listed, a floating coffin with pretensions." Duran took the deed, folded it carefully, and put it in his jacket pocket. The coordinates led them 3 hours out from Drug Suvan, into a debris field that orbited nothing. Old wreckage floated in slow clusters, pieces of ships that had broken apart so long ago that the metal had gone gray and soft. And there, in the middle of it, sat the thing Duran had bought. It was enormous. That was the first thing. He had not expected enormous. The listing had said vessel, and his brain had filled in something the size of a large freighter, maybe a patrol boat. What drifted in front of the Drift Queen's viewport was something else entirely. It was a warship, and it was old, and it was vast, and it was dark. No running lights. No heat signature. The hull was scorched black along one whole side, marked by hits so old the scorch marks had smoothed over into the metal like old scars. It had the shape of something that had been built not to look impressive, but to survive. Russa stared at it for a long time without speaking. 13 credits, she said finally. 13 credits, Duran confirmed. They docked at the airlock on the ship's port side because it was the only one that looked intact. Duran put his hand on the panel expecting nothing. The panel lit up green. The airlock opened. He pulled his hand back and looked at it like it had done something without asking him first. Inside, the ship was dark and cold and smelled of sealed metal and very old time. They moved through corridors with their helmet lights on, past bulkheads marked with script that Duran did not recognize. The design of everything was different from modern ships. Older, heavier, built the way things are built when the people building them expect the worst and plan accordingly. Then the lights came on. Not all at once. Section by section, corridor by corridor, a slow warm light spreading through the ship from somewhere deep inside it. Duran and Russa stopped walking and stood very still. A voice came from everywhere at once. It was calm and clear and careful, the way someone speaks when they have thought about every word before using it. Biometric signature confirmed. Bloodline match verified. Welcome aboard the GSV Unbroken Accord. I am Warden, primary operational intelligence of this vessel. I have been in reduced power mode for 427 years, 3 months and 11 days. It is good to have a captain again. Duran and Russa looked at each other in the new light of a dreadnought bridge that had just decided to wake up. Somewhere in the ship, deep in its bones, something enormous hummed to life. Warden spoke again, in exactly the same tone it had used to say hello. Captain, 17 separate entities have already flagged this vessel's registration transfer and are transmitting formal inquiries. Shall I respond on your behalf? Duran opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the deed in his jacket pocket. Not yet, he said. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a person when they realize that something much larger than them has just become their problem. It is not a panic silence. It is more like the silence of a man standing at the bottom of a mountain he did not know he was going to climb when he woke up that morning. Duran stood on the bridge of the GSV Unbroken Accord and felt that silence very clearly. The bridge was wide enough that his footsteps made an echo when he walked. The consoles curved in a long arc across the front wall, dark glass that had lit up with soft amber the moment Warden recognized him. The captain's seat sat in the center, elevated slightly, made of something that looked like dark metal but was warm to the touch. Duran did not sit in it yet. He was not ready for that. Warden gave him the tour without being asked. The AI's voice came from everywhere at once, guiding them through the ship the way a very patient and very old teacher might explain something to a student it had been waiting a long time for. It showed them the weapons bays, long corridors lined with systems that Duran could not name but could recognize as serious. Warden explained that the weapons predated modern energy shielding by roughly 60 years, which meant they had been specifically designed for a time before ships had shields, and that this made them very effective against ships that did have shields, because a weapon built to punch through solid armor does not particularly care about energy fields layered over solid armor. Russa wrote all of this down. She wrote things down when she was trying not to look alarmed. Warden showed them the reactor. It occupied a space at the heart of the ship that was 3 decks tall and hummed with something that felt less like a sound and more like a pressure behind the eyes. The reactor had been running in minimal power mode for over 4 centuries. It had not failed once. Warden noted this without pride, simply as a fact, the way someone might mention that a door had stayed locked. Duran asked the question that had been sitting at the front of his mind since the airlock opened. Why didn't anyone else claim it, in 400 years? Warden paused, a short pause, the kind that means the answer is complicated. Under the pre-coalition naval charter, command of this vessel can only be legally assumed by a direct blood descendant of the last registered captain. The coalition's auction registry listed this ship under its original pre-coalition hull registration number rather than its class designation. Their own software flagged it as unclassified obsolete scrap and priced it at minimum reserve. No human flag was attached to the listing. The assumption, on the Coalition's part, was that no qualifying bloodline still existed. They intended to quietly decommission the vessel through the auction process. The auction would close with no bids, and the ship would be formally declared abandoned property and dismantled. Risa looked up from her notes. Except someone bid. Except someone bid 13 credits, Warden confirmed. Risa turned to Darren with an expression he knew well. It was the expression she used when she was deciding how angry to be and had not yet made up her mind. "You broke their plan by accident," she said. "I was going to use the hull plates for parts," he said. She went back to her notes. Risa spent 2 hours going through the deed paperwork while Darren explored the ship. She was good at contracts. She had grown up in a trading family, the kind where reading the fine print was taught the same way other families taught children to tie their shoes. She found the clause they needed buried on page 31 of the auction terms, in a subsection titled Registration Transfer Validity, in language so dry it could have been used to preserve food. She called Darren back to the bridge and showed him. The sale was airtight. The Coalition's own system had processed it. Their own stamp was on the deed. Their own registry had issued the transfer confirmation. Under their own rules, a completed sale could not be reversed without proof of fraud, and there was no fraud here. There was only a mistake made by their own software, stamped by their own officials. "They sold it to you legally," Risa said, "and now they want it back." The communication came in while she was still talking. The screen at the front of the bridge lit with the face of a creature Darren did not recognize, broad and pale and slow-moving, like something that lived in deep water and had learned patience from the ocean. It introduced itself as Grand Registrar Abu, head of the Coalition Auction Registry. Its voice was very smooth. It was the voice of a being that had spent a long time learning how to say unpleasant things pleasantly. Abu explained that there had been an administrative error. He used the phrase 3 times. He expressed regret. He expressed concern. He offered 500 credits for the return of the vessel, which he described warmly as a fair and generous resolution to an unfortunate situation. Darren looked at the bridge around him, at the weapons systems Warden had just described, at the reactor that had not failed in 400 years, at the deed in his pocket with the Coalition's own stamp on it. He said no. Abu's expression did not change. He thanked Darren for his time and closed the channel. 20 minutes later, Warden reported 3 Coalition frigates entering the outer edge of the debris field. Admiral Vorn Cal appeared on screen without being invited. He was tall even sitting, and he had 4 arms, and he spoke the way people speak when they have not been told no very often. He informed Darren that the vessel was being impounded under Emergency Heritage Protection Protocol, and that Darren should prepare to be boarded. "Warden," Darren said quietly, "are we in weapons range of those ships?" "They are well within range, Captain. All 3 frigates." "Don't fire." "Understood." Darren opened the channel to the Admiral. He asked one question, in a calm and reasonable voice. Could the Admiral please transmit the specific legal article under which he intended to conduct this impoundment? The Admiral's expression shifted very slightly. Darren had spent the last 2 hours reading the pre-coalition naval charter that Warden had pulled up on the bridge display. He had a feeling the Admiral had not read it at all. He waited. Admiral Vorn Cal did not answer the question. He told Darren that the legal basis would be transmitted through official channels in due time, closed the channel, and left his 3 frigates sitting at the edge of the debris field like 3 dogs waiting to be told they were allowed to bite. Darren watched them on Warden's display screen and understood exactly what was happening. The Admiral was buying time. He was calling someone. He was asking someone else what to do. That told Darren something useful. The Admiral was not sure. A person who is sure does not need to make a call. A person who is sure tells you the law and moves forward. A person who is not sure goes quiet and waits for instructions. Darren pulled up the pre-coalition naval charter on the bridge display and kept reading. He was not a lawyer. He had finished roughly half of a secondary education before leaving school to work cargo runs with his uncle, and his understanding of legal documents was limited to whatever kept him out of trouble on the average trade route. But he was good at finding the thing that mattered inside a long document, the way a man who has sorted junk for years learns to find the piece of metal that is worth something inside a pile of pieces that are not. He found what he needed on page 9. Under the pre-coalition Unified Naval Charter of Accord, which was the founding legal document upon which the Galactic Coalition had built its own laws, a registered command vessel could not be boarded, impounded, or seized by any military force while an ownership dispute was active in the legal system. The key word was active. If Darren filed for formal legal review, the frigates outside could not touch the ship. Not legally. And the coalition could not ignore their own founding charter because their entire legal authority came from it. If they voided the charter, they voided themselves. He filed for formal legal review through Warden's comm system before the Admiral's hour of silence was finished. Warden confirmed the filing with the tone of someone who had been waiting to do exactly this. The review request has been received by the Coalition's Legal Processing Division. Under the Charter, all military action against this vessel is suspended pending the outcome. A preliminary hearing has been scheduled at Station Hall Marin in 4 days. The 3 frigates did not move for another 6 hours. Then, one by one, they pulled back to a legal distance and stayed there. Risa spent the travel time to Hall Marin preparing. She prepared the way she always prepared for something important, which was to read everything twice, write a summary, read the summary, and then argue both sides of the question out loud while Darren sat nearby and listened. He was useful as an audience. He asked the questions a reasonable person who did not know the law would ask, and those were exactly the questions the other side would use. Hall Marin Station was larger and cleaner than Dreg 7, the kind of place where the lighting was designed to make transactions feel official. The hearing hall had high ceilings and rows of seats, and a bench at the front where a panel of 3 coalition legal adjudicators sat with the expressions of people being paid to appear neutral. Grand Registrar Abu was there in person. He was larger than his screen image suggested, wide and slow and pale, and he had brought 2 legal advisors, both Thurvian, both carrying data pads thick with documentation. He looked at Darren with the polite warmth of someone who expected this to be over quickly. Abu's argument was straightforward. The listing of item 1204 had been the result of a software classification error. The ship had been entered into the auction system under an obsolete registry tag rather than its proper hull designation. This was an administrative failure, not a valid sale. The coalition requested that the transfer be voided and the vessel returned. The lead adjudicator turned to Darren. Darren laid the deed on the table. He pointed to the stamp. He pointed to the transaction confirmation number. He pointed to the date and the signature of the auctioneer at Dreg 7 who was a coalition-certified official. He said simply that the coalition's own system processed the sale. Their own certified official completed it. Their own registry issued the confirmation. If the software made an error, that was a coalition problem. The deed was valid. Abu's advisor started to speak. Darren held up one hand. He asked the adjudicators if they were familiar with Section 14 of the Pre-Coalition Naval Charter. The clause that stated that a legally completed vessel transfer could not be retroactively voided without evidence of fraud, misrepresentation, or coercion on the part of the buyer. There had been no fraud. Darren had bid the reserve price. He had paid what was asked. He had not misrepresented anything. He had not coerced anyone. The adjudicators conferred quietly. Then Warden's voice came through Darren's earpiece. Captain, I have completed the bloodline verification cross-reference that the Charter requires for command legitimacy confirmation. Shall I transmit to the tribunal? Darren said yes. The display screen at the front of the hall lit with Warden's transmission. It was a genealogical chain, clean and documented, traced through colonial registry records and old Earth population databases that most people had forgotten still existed. It ran from Darren Cole backward through 400 years of births and names and places, all the way to a single point. Captain Dale Sorn, last registered commanding officer of the GSV Unbroken Accord, listed as missing in deep space 427 years ago. Darren's direct ancestor. The hearing hall went very quiet. Risa leaned over slowly and whispered, "Your great something grandfather was a galactic war hero, and you were selling scrap parts for a living." "I didn't know," Darren said. "I know you didn't know. That's what makes it funny." Abu's advisors were whispering to each other rapidly. The Grand Registrar himself had gone very still, the way a very large, slow creature goes still when it is thinking hard about what to do next. The lead adjudicator called a recess. Darren walked out of the hearing hall into the corridor and sat on a bench and looked at the wall for a while. He had come here as a junk trader trying to hold onto something he bought for 13 credits. He was leaving as something more complicated, and he had not had time yet to decide what he thought about that. Admiral Vorn Cal found him there. The Admiral dismissed his attendants with a gesture and sat down on the bench across from Darren, which was a strange thing for an admiral to do, but he did it like a man who had decided that the normal approach was finished. He did not speak immediately. When he did, his voice was different, quieter. The performance of authority had gone out of it. "You need to understand what that ship is," Vorn Cal said. "Not what it was built as, what it means. The Unbroken Accord fought in the war that made the coalition possible. Every species in this government traces its founding membership back to agreements made under that ship's guns. It is not just a warship, it is a symbol. And if a human being flies it, captains it, claims it under the pre-coalition charter, it changes what humans are in the eyes of every species that remembers what that ship represents." Darren looked at him. "Is that a problem?" The Admiral stood up. His forearms were very still. "It is a problem for people who have spent 200 years deciding that humans are a minor issue," he said. "And those people will not stop at a legal hearing." He walked away. Darren sat on the bench a while longer and thought about what it meant when the man who had sent 3 warships to take your property was now warning you that someone more dangerous was coming. The recess lasted 2 days. That was the first sign something was wrong. A legal recess in a preliminary hearing was supposed to last a few hours at most, long enough for the adjudicators to review the documents and come back with a procedural ruling. 2 days meant the adjudicators were being pressured. 2 days meant someone above the hearing was making calls. Darren knew this because Risa told him, and Risa knew this because she had grown up around people who used legal systems the way other people used tools, picking them up and putting them down depending on what job needed doing. They stayed aboard the Unbroken Accord while the recess held. The ship was docked at Hallmarin's outer ring, which had required special clearance because no docking arm on the station was sized for a dreadnought prime. Warden had extended the Accord's own mooring clamps and latched directly onto the station's outer hull, which the station administrator had strongly objected to and then chosen not to pursue further after getting a look at the size of the thing that had done it. On the second night of the recess, Risa intercepted a transmission. She had been monitoring coalition comm channels as a precaution, using a receiver array she had built herself from parts that were technically meant for civilian weather satellites. It was not legal, strictly speaking. Darren had not asked her about it because there were questions he found it useful not to have answers to. What she pulled from the channel was a coded message to Admiral Vorn Cal's fleet, and it took her 4 hours to decode it. But when she did, She showed Darren without saying anything first. She just turned the screen toward him and let him read. The orders were simple. The moment the adjudicators issued a provisional challenge to Darren's bloodline claim, which the coalition's legal team was arranging through a sympathetic adjudicator who would be inserted into the panel the next morning, the accord was to be boarded under the provisional authority of the challenge and held in coalition custody pending resolution. The operation was described as a temporary security measure. The message used the phrase administrative necessity twice. Darren read it twice. "They're not going to wait for the hearing to finish," he said. "They were never going to," Risa said. "The hearing was the stalling. This is the plan." They left the station before sunrise. Warden disengaged the mooring clamps quietly and moved the Accord away from Hall Marin at minimal thrust, slow enough that it did not register as a departure on the standard traffic monitors, just a vessel shifting position in the outer dock ring. By the time the station's traffic control flagged an unscheduled movement, the Accord was already 2,000 kilometers out and accelerating. Vorn Cal's fleet had grown. Warden confirmed it calmly. The original 3 frigates had been joined by 2 heavy cruisers, large gray vessels shaped like hammerheads, carrying enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. They had positioned themselves in a loose net around the debris field where the Accord had first been found, clearly expecting Darren to run for familiar ground. He did not run for familiar ground. Warden plotted a course away from the debris field, and the Accord moved on it, and the coalition fleet adjusted and began to close. The heavy cruisers were faster than the frigates. They moved like things that knew they were the biggest presence in the space around them. The provisional injunction came in 20 minutes after the chase began. A legal notice, transmitted by the adjudicator panel, citing unverified bloodline claims and ordering the Accord to halt and submit to inspection pending verification. It had the right stamps and the right language, and it had been put together fast, which meant it had been prepared in advance. Darren read it. He could see the seams in it, the places where the language had been written to sound like it had one meaning while actually allowing another. He had seen this kind of writing before in cargo contracts, the ones where the client wanted to pay less than agreed and had already written the justification before the job was done. "Warden," he said, "I want to demonstrate something, not weapons, defensive systems only, their choice." "Understood, Captain. Hull phase shielding is available." "Activate it." The first frigate to move into intercept range fired a ranging shot, a low-power energy pulse meant to test the Accord's shields before committing to a full engagement. Standard tactical protocol. The ranging shot hit the Accord's hull and slid off sideways, not deflected, not absorbed, but skewed, like a stone thrown at water that curves at the last moment for no visible reason. The frigate's targeting system tried to lock. The lock failed. It tried again. It failed again. Warden explained to Darren without being asked that the hull phase shielding worked by introducing a micro-frequency variance into the ship's outer hull layer that caused energy-based targeting systems to read the vessel's position as being approximately 3 meters from where it actually was. Modern targeting software corrected for this variance when it knew to look for it. The Coalition's targeting systems did not know to look for it because the technology was 400 years old and had been in use before the current targeting systems existed. The frigate stopped firing. The second frigate tried. The third. The 2 heavy cruisers lit up their targeting arrays, and the arrays slid off the hull like water running off old stone. 5 ships, none of them could get a lock. The Accord had not fired a single weapon. Darren opened the broadband Coalition frequency, the one every ship in the area monitored, the one that was recorded automatically and logged to the Coalition's own communication archive. He spoke clearly and at a normal pace because he was not trying to threaten anyone. He was reading. He read Article 7 of the Pre-Coalition Unified Naval Charter of Accord. He read it in full, which took about 3 minutes. Article 7 stated that any military action taken against a registered command vessel during an active legal review constituted an act of treason against the founding compact of the Galactic Coalition, punishable under the Charter's own enforcement provisions, which predated and superseded Coalition military law. Every shot those ships had fired was in the Coalition's own archive. Dead silence settled over every open channel. Darren closed the broadband link. He sat in the captain's seat, which he had finally started using 2 days ago because standing up for everything was tiring. He waited. The comm system chimed. A direct channel request, not from the Admiral's ship, from a personal unit registered to Grand Registrar Abu. Darren accepted it. Abu's face appeared on screen. The careful diplomatic warmth was gone. What was left was something older, something that had been doing this kind of work for a very long time and had just watched a plan it believed in fall apart in real time. He looked tired. He looked like a creature who had run out of moves and had decided to stop pretending otherwise. "What do you want?" Abu asked. His voice was quiet. He was not performing anymore. Darren took a slow breath. "I'll tell you," he said, "but I need a few hours first." He needed to talk to Risa, because the truth was that up to this moment, he had been entirely focused on not losing the ship, and nobody had stopped to think about what winning actually looked like. Risa made a list. This was how she handled things that mattered. She pulled out her notebook, the actual paper one she had carried since she was 16, and she uncapped her pen and she wrote a heading at the top that said simply, "What do we want?" Then she looked at Darren and waited. Darren paced. The Accord's bridge was large enough that packing did not feel ridiculous. He walked the length of the curved console and back, and Warden had the good sense to stay quiet, which Darren was beginning to appreciate as a quality. The AI spoke when it had something worth saying and did not fill silence with noise. After 4 centuries alone, it had probably learned that silence was not the enemy. "Money," Darren said, "to start somewhere." Risa wrote it down. "The ship," he said. She wrote that down too. "What else?" she asked. Darren stopped packing. He thought about what the Admiral had told him in that corridor at Hallmaren, about what the ship meant, about what it represented to every species that remembered what it had once stood for. And he thought about the auction catalog, 47 pages long, and how item 1204 had been buried near the end of it in language nobody was supposed to understand. He thought about how many other listings there were like that. How many other items buried in technical language that were worth more than their reserve price, sold to no one, canceled quietly, money or property or rights that should have gone somewhere, but instead just disappeared into the system. He thought about how many humans were in the outer rim running cargo and salvage and small trade, living in rented docking bays, reading catalogs at night with 13 credits and no real plan. "I want something that lasts longer than me," he said. Risa looked up from the notebook. "Explain," she said. He was still working it out himself, so he did not explain well, but she listened and wrote notes and asked the right questions. And by the time he was done talking, they had a list that was 4 items long. Not demands in the angry sense. Just 4 things that were either fair or provable or both. Before he sent anything to Abu, Warden asked if Darren had time to see something. He followed the AI's guiding lights through the ship, down 2 levels from the bridge, into a part of the Accord he had not yet explored. The corridor here was quieter, warmer. The metal was the same ancient alloy as everywhere else, but the walls had been finished differently, smoother, with markings along both sides that were not functional but decorative, the kind of thing that exists in a space people were meant to spend time in. The room at the end was called the Memorial Hall. Warden said the name simply, without explanation, and the door opened. It was not a large room. It was lined along 3 walls with panels of dark material, and embedded in each panel were images and text and small lights, arranged with the kind of care that someone had spent real time on. Records, Darren realized, not data files. Records in the old sense, made to be looked at, made to last. Every officer who had served on the Accord, every crew member of note, every captain. The last panel on the left wall held a figure. Warden projected it softly into the space in front of the panel, a holographic impression built from logs and visual records. A man, human, older than Darren, weathered in the way that people who spend decades in space get weathered, as if the vacuum outside slowly sands the softness off a person's face and leaves something harder and quieter behind. He was wearing the uniform of the pre-coalition naval service, the kind Darren had seen in old historical images. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked straight forward, the way people stand in official portraits when they are trying to look as though the portrait was not their idea. He looked like Darren, not exactly, but enough that it sat in Darren's chest in a strange way. Warden said, "Captain Dale Sorn, last registered commanding officer of the GSV Unbroken Accord." Darren stood and looked at the man his blood came from, and who his family had no record of, not a name, not a story, not even a rumor. 400 years of silence between them. Warden played the final log. Sorn's voice was calm. He spoke the way the hologram looked, without waste, without performance. He said that he was taking the Accord out of the war zone, that the conflict consuming the sector at that time had no good outcome, and that both sides wanted the ship badly enough that whoever got it would use it to ensure there was no compromise, only victory, and that the kind of victory that required a dreadnought prime to achieve was not a victory anyone should want. He said he had decided the ship should wait, that he was setting it into low-power mode at a safe coordinate and keying its recognition systems to his bloodline, because whoever his family eventually became, they would be human, and humans had a way of surviving things that were designed to end them. He hoped whoever found the ship would know what to do with it. He said he was sorry he could not do more. The log ended. Darren stood in the memorial hall for a while. He did not feel what he had expected to feel, which was something large and dramatic. He felt something smaller and more solid, like a weight settling into the right place. He went back to the bridge and opened the channel to Abu. He laid out the 4 things clearly. First, full and permanent legal recognition of his ownership, recorded in the Coalition Registry under the pre-coalition charter, with no option for administrative override. Second, restoration of Captain Dale Sorn's service record. Darren had found it in Warden's historical archive, the original record, and found also the date it had been removed from the Coalition's official history, which was 212 years ago, when humanity's political standing in the Coalition had declined, and it had become convenient to forget which species had contributed what to the war that made the Coalition possible. Third, a formal acknowledgement in writing, stamped and filed under the Coalition legal registry, that the Dreg 7 auction was valid, and that no retroactive challenge to the transfer could be filed by any Coalition body at any future date. Fourth, a civilian representative seat, not a political appointment, not a military commission, a formal seat for an independent human representative in the Outer Rim Trade Council, recognized by the Coalition as legitimate, with the right to raise disputes and be heard. Abu was quiet for a long time after Darren stopped speaking. Then he asked about the 4th one. Darren told him the truth, that he was probably not the only human who had lost something to a buried clause in an auction listing or a contract written in language no one without a legal education could parse. That the Accord was worth more as a proof that the system could be made to work correctly than it was as a weapon. That he did not want a fleet. He wanted a precedent. Risa told him later, after the channel closed, that it was the single most intelligent thing she had ever heard him say. He told her not to repeat it, because it would ruin his reputation. The Coalition's response came 6 hours later, written, stamped, signed by Abu under his official seal and co-signed by 3 senior Coalition legal officials who looked, in their thumbnail images beside their signatures, like people who had spent a very bad night being told what they had to agree to. All 4 demands met. Warden announced the confirmation in the same voice it had used to say hello on the first day. Registration confirmed under pre-coalition naval charter provisions. The GSV Unbroken Accord is formally and permanently registered to Captain Darren Cole. Congratulations, Captain. Admiral Vorn Cal's fleet withdrew. The heavy cruisers first, then the frigates, pulling back in a formation that managed to look orderly without looking happy. Risa set down her notebook and looked out through the bridge viewport at the open space they were drifting through. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "He trusted someone would come." "Sorn," Darren said. "He sealed up his ship and went missing and trusted that one day one of his family would find it and know what to do." Darren did not answer that directly. He looked at the captain's seat and thought about a man 400 years ago who had made a choice that required him to believe in people he would never meet. "I hope I'm doing all right by him," Darren said. "So far," Risa said, "so far." 3 months is not a long time in the life of a ship that is 400 years old. But it is long enough to learn where everything is. Long enough to stop getting turned around in the corridors below Deck 3. Long enough to know which of the bridge consoles ran hot and needed the ambient temperature dropped a degree, and which internal comm channel Warden preferred for routine updates versus emergencies. Long enough for a junk trader from the outer rim to start, very slowly and with considerable stubbornness, to become a captain. Darren had not tried to recruit a crew. He was not sure he wanted one yet, and Warden had told him in its direct way that the Accord systems had been designed to operate with a skeleton crew of 5 at minimum capability and a full complement of several hundred at maximum. For everything Darren and Risa needed the ship to do right now, 2 people and 1 very capable AI were sufficient. What they needed the ship to do was work. Not fight, not sit in a famous orbit looking impressive. Work. The same work they had always done. Salvage runs and cargo hauls and parts retrieval, except now they did it aboard a vessel that made every pirate gang and coalition patrol in the outer rim recalculate very quickly whether today was a good day to cause a problem. It was not. It was never a good day to cause a problem for a ship that the Galactic Coalition had put 5 warships against and failed to touch. The jobs were easier now. Not because Darren cut corners, but because when you showed up in a dreadnought prime to negotiate a salvage contract, the other party's opening offer was generally more reasonable. Word had spread. The Outer Rim was not a small community in the way a town is small, but it was small in the way that matters, which is that news travels fast when the news is interesting. And the story of the human who bought the oldest warship in the galaxy for 13 credits and held it against a coalition fleet using its own laws was very interesting news. Risa had started getting messages, not all from strangers, some from people she knew, traders and small operators from across the rim who had their own stories about auction irregularities, contract clauses that turned out to mean less than they were told, fees that appeared after agreements were signed. She kept a file. It was growing. The precedent was already moving. 2 other human operators in the Outer Rim had successfully contested auction transfers in the 6 weeks since the Accord's registration was confirmed. Both cases had used the same charter clause Darren had cited. The Coalition's registry system had been formally audited for the first time in 80 years, which had caused considerable distress in the offices responsible for it, and led to the discovery of 17 additional listings that had been priced incorrectly in ways that consistently disadvantaged small independent buyers. The audit findings were public, which meant they could not be quietly corrected and forgotten. They had to be formally addressed. Abu had sent a brief, formal communication acknowledging that Darren's civilian representative seat was ready to be activated whenever he named his representative. Darren had written back that he was thinking about it. He was. He wanted someone who could actually use the seat, someone who knew the difference between a speech and a result. He had someone in mind but had not asked her yet, and Risa had not yet realized he was thinking about asking her, which was why those conversations had been going smoothly. The meeting with Admiral Vorn Cal was not something Darren had expected. The Admiral sent a request for a meeting at a neutral station, a small refueling post called Outpost Wren, and he sent it through personal channels rather than official ones, which meant it was not a coalition communication. It was one person asking another person to sit down, without ranks or titles in the request. Darren went. Vorn Cal was already there when Darren arrived, sitting at a corner table in the station's only food hall, without attendants, with a drink in one of his 4 hands and the other 3 idle on the table. He looked different outside the official context. Less like an admiral, more like a very old being who was tired in the way that things get tired when they have been doing the same work for a very long time. He did not apologize. Darren had not expected him to. He told Darren something instead. He said that the unbroken accord had been in the coalition's records since the coalition was founded, that it had never been removed from the records even when its registration was classified and its location was sealed, because there were people in the coalition's early history who believed it should be preserved, who understood what it had meant to the war that made their alliance possible. He said that over the centuries, as humans declined in political standing, and the coalition expanded and grew comfortable with a certain order of things, the accord had been gradually reclassified, its history reduced, its record made smaller, until it became a line item in an auction catalog that was never supposed to close. He said that was deliberate. He said it plainly without excusing it. "Then why tell me?" Darren asked. The Admiral looked at his drink. "Because what you did should be known, not the fight, not the legal case, the thing before all of that." He paused. "You walked into an auction with 13 credits and you read the catalog. That is the part that matters. Every other being in that room saw item 1204 and moved on. You read it." Darren thought about that for a moment. "I was looking for hull plates." "Yes," Vorn Cal said, "and you found something else, and you did not let go of it." He set down his drink. "The Accord was the most feared ship in the pre-coalition era, not because of its weapons, because of what it proved. That one ship operating within its legal mandate could not be moved by a force 10 times its size. That the law, used correctly, is the most powerful weapon that exists." He looked at Darren steadily. "I think it has found the right captain." He stood, gathered himself, and left. Darren sat at the table for a while after the Admiral was gone, and thought about a man named Dale Sorn who had made a choice 400 years ago in a war he could not win, trusting the future with something he could not keep. He thought about what it meant to carry something forward without knowing you were carrying it. He thought about 13 credits and a hand on an airlock panel, and a voice from everywhere at once saying it was good to have a captain again. He went back to the Accord. Risa was on the comm with a freight broker, arguing about delivery windows in the specific way she argued when she was going to win, but wanted the other party to feel like it was close. The ship's reactor hummed at full power, a sound that had been absent for 4 centuries and was now simply part of what the Accord was again, a presence in the walls, a warmth in the floor, a ship alive and awake and doing what ships are meant to do. Warden spoke as Darren settled into the captain's seat. "Freight confirmation received from Risa. We have 2 pending salvage contracts and 1 escort query." Captain Sun used to say the ship had more history ahead of her than behind her. I believe he was correct. Duran looked out through the bridge viewport at open space, clean and dark and full of distance. He thought about everything that had led to this moment: the blown fuel converter, the empty account, the 47-page catalog, item 1204, reserve price 13 credits, no bidders. He had paid 13 credits. He had an ancient warship. He had a legal precedent rippling across the outer rim. He had a seat at a table that humans had not sat at in 2 centuries. He had a partner who was going to be furious when she found out. He wanted her to be their representative, and he was looking forward to that conversation. He had Sun's ship. "Warden," he said, "give me a heading somewhere new." The unbroken accord turned in open space, slow and enormous and unhurried, the way something turns when it has nowhere it needs to rush to and all the time in the world to get there. Then it accelerated,